afternoon. Welcome to Recovery Live. I am your special guest host today, as Tom and Alicia are out in Arizona doing a retreat at a school center. So I'm excited to hear that retreat goes. But in the meantime, you get me today for Recovery Live and two awesome guests that are going to join me for a cool conversation. We're going to talk about sober spaces and like the evolution of sober spaces, what they look like today, maybe versus what they look like 50 years ago. And just this kind of sober curious movement that we're seeing. So it should be an interesting conversation. But before I invite them on, just a couple of, retreat updates. We have Malibu, which I'm still trying to figure out how I can get to Malibu in December. So it's the first weekend of December. The 6th, 7th, and 8th, and it's a beautiful venue. We still have some spots open, so if you're interested, definitely sign up. If you need financial aid, we have financial assistance available, so just reach out. You can email us at info@kingswaverecovery.org and let us know what you need, and we will do our best to help you out. We've never turned anyone away due to finances. And then the easiest option is the virtual retreat, which is coming up in January. And if I'm glitchy, I apologize in advance. It appears that I'm lagging a little bit. So we'll see how this goes. But virtual retreats open. We have people that come from across the United States as well as Europe and Canada. And it's a really fun experience to hear the steps taught from people who have a slightly different perspective on it. So we'd love to see you there in January. It's always a great weekend. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Grant and Shalliea on to join the conversation, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Welcome, Grant and Shalliea. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks.
Grant, can you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about recovery to you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. My name is Grant Wheeler. I'm professionally, I'm the volunteer manager in New York City for a nonprofit called the Phoenix. We build fitness, community, wellness, creative events that are free to anybody with 48 hours of sobriety. Almost all of our programming is volunteer-led. That's my professional cap. My personal story is I'm a person in recovery. Recovering through the 12 steps. And I used to own bars and restaurants, so I have a strong awareness of what is and what is not a sober space. I guess it's pretty easy for me to draw that line. Yeah,
definitely. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like within the hospitality industry, specifically restaurants and bars, there's a high prevalence of alcoholism and addiction issues, at least from my experience that I've seen anecdotally.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of problem drinking. There's definitely drug use. It's hard for me to say whether or not there's like a lot of addiction or whatever, but that was my experience.
Probably
I was somebody in active addiction. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you're around drugs and alcohol all the time.
Right.
So if you're somebody like me, it's pretty easy to get like one sort of mixed up and end up somewhere you don't want to be in regards to how you're feeling about yourself but there's also, it's also kind of self-selecting, I think.
Yeah.
Like for me, it was like, oh, I found a job that I can like be in active addiction and still show up for. Because the hours are appropriate and because like there's always some way for me to sort of like cut the edge off, or like, it can be, most of my clients or my customers are intoxicated ipso facto. Like how much are they going to notice that I'm intoxicated?
Right. That's an interesting point. Yeah.
So I think it's also self-selecting in that way.
Yeah.
It's like,
that makes a lot of sense.
It's like, oh, I am passionate about alcohol, So yeah, I would love to work here. That sounds like a great place for me.
That's funny. Shalliea, how about you?
Hey, Lisa and Grant. So I'm a person in long-term recovery from both substance and mental health co-occurring disorder. And I'm also a veteran. So my journey with recovery started after serving in the military. I'm currently in the peer support field. And from serving in the military, you know, we just had this lifestyle of, well, you know, we do interesting activities after work, drinking mostly. And you don't really realize that certain things are going to affect your life until you don't have that structure to keep you disciplined and showing up to work the next day. And so that's where my story began, getting out of the military, not having that structure and engaging in certain things that just really was causing my life to fall apart when I realized that I had to become disciplined all on my own.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too when you think about like that structure and how that kind of keeps us in line, so to speak, and then you have this kind of structural, like this shift, and it creates havoc on all parts of us, not just our day to day, but our mental health, our physical health, all those things are impacted. So I don't know that people quite think about that change in structure and how that could have an impact on us. So it's it's a great point. So reason we're having this conversation today is in 2 weeks, on the 28th of November, we are hosting what's called a mocktail hour in New York City, where we've invited Absence of Proof to come and make mocktails for us. And then we're going to have a panel discussion relatively around the same conversation about sober spaces and just how sobriety is becoming, I think, more socially acceptable and inclusive, right? So Absence of Proof started, Grant, I don't know if you know how long ago, but her whole business model is doing pop-up bars that are alcohol free. So you still get your fancy drink on, but there's no alcohol in it. So you can still feel like you're having part of the fun. And there's no social peer pressure to have an alcoholic drink because there is none. But you still get to have that atmosphere. So it's an interesting concept that really seems to have taken off. And so we're kind of embracing that and talking about it and exploring that topic a little bit more today. And Grant, I think your organization has a really awesome sector to this sober space as well. Tell me a little bit how like your people kind of started to engage with like this. It seems like physical fitness is like one of those obvious next steps that people take in wellness.
So yeah, I mean, if you were to talk to Tom, it's a big step. If you were to talk to me, it's a big next step. Physical fitness and moving my body has been really important to my recovery pretty much from day one. I remember I sort of like started going to meetings and joined a CrossFit gym at the same time. And I would like send a lot of mixed signals between those spaces. Like I would try to talk to my CrossFit coach about my step work and try to talk to my sponsor about like today's workout. And they would like, to them, they were two very different things, but to me, they were so integrated. And that's part of what I think drew me to the Phoenix at first. The Phoenix used to do primarily physical fitness activities. I guess it still is sort of our calling card, but we do a lot more now.
Yeah.
For example, like this Saturday, we have a singing workshop, which will be pretty neat. It's like this wonderful, it's called Sing a Secret. It's this amazing workshop where this volunteer named Kayla, basically takes this concept where if you think you're good and you think you're beautiful, then your voice is good and your voice is beautiful. And you sort of like sing with others. And it's this other kind of type 2 fun for some people coming into a gym or like showing up at a race and being like, we're going to run a 5K. Like that would be the scariest thing in the whole world.
Right.
But for a lot of people that wouldn't be scared of that 5K, like doing a singing workshop would be the scariest thing in the whole world. So I think part of it is about like expanding and exploring different levels of comfort for people, around what their expectations are about what they are or not capable of.
And it's like, a really safe space. Like, I went to one of your events, rock climbing, and I went in. I'm not an athletic person, right? And I went in, I'm like, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to embarrass myself. Like, I've never done this. I'm weak. And within like 5 minutes, like a couple people like kind of rallied around me, like, come on, let's go. And I did.
Yeah.
And I got further than I ever did. And like I walked out of there with just such an awesome experience. I met so many amazing people. It was wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we do. And sometimes for some people, depending on where you're at that day or just sort of what you're in the mood for or how many other events you've been to that week, it can be anything from like a coffee social at a coffee shop to a group walk to like it can be a CrossFit class, or it can be rock climbing, or it could be a breathwork workshop, or it could be, you know, it's funny, this last weekend the New York City Marathon happened and we had like 6 Phoenix members / volunteers running the marathon for the Phoenix with charity bibs. And like I made that a Phoenix event.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So like we technically had like 6 people in a Phoenix event, like running the New York City Marathon. So there's a whole sort of scale of what it could be. But the idea is that we have a space. It could be anywhere as long as it's physically and emotionally safe and ideally fun. That's free and available to anybody with 48 hours of sobriety. So you don't need to identify as being in recovery. You don't need to identify as having been an addict. You don't need to identify as an ally. You don't need to identify as a sober curious person. Like the only requirement is this self-defined amount of time where you've abstained from substances. And outside of that, there's, you know, no labels required.
Yeah.
And it's pretty neat. Like, you know, as a 12-step person, it really opened my eyes as to like both how many different ways there are for people to exist in this world in this like sober, like substance-free sort of space.
Yeah.
And then also it sort of showed me in my own personal journey like how much my life as I'm living it outside of my recovery protocol can be of value to people who like want to get or stay or explore sobriety. Like just like a thing that I would do on a Tuesday afternoon, being like, I'm going rock climbing. I'm going to go do CrossFit with a couple other people who don't use, how opening that up as like a public offering to people can be so extraordinarily valuable.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like the biggest thing was like, I'd already been doing a lot of this stuff, right? But I've been doing it for me. And I guess I'm still kind of doing it for me, but the fact that I can open it up to others, like there's a lot of value in that. And I'm not special in that regard. Like if anybody is like not using, or not drinking and is living a life that they want to share with other people, like it doesn't have to come through an amazing organization like Aim to Believe. Like it doesn't have to come through somebody making a commitment to start going to AA or NA meetings or refuge recovery meetings or Dharma recovery meetings or smart recovery meetings or walking into a walk-in clinic. Like it doesn't need to come from those spaces. It can just come from somebody being like, yeah, like this is how I'm rolling. You want to come? You know, and like just being inclusive in that way,
right?
I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. It's all about that safe space, you know, and wherever that's generated or curated is great. So yeah, Shalliea, do you have any experience with like, you know?
I want to speak on what Grant said really quick before you ask me another question. That inclusivity is so important. I like how you put emphasis on the fact that it's not about those people in recovery and those people who are sober. It's just about having that space for us to come together because, like you said, it doesn't take like a special program or a meeting. It's just really about the activity that we're choosing to come together and engage in so that we live healthier lifestyles, really. Sedentary lifestyles, whether you've used substances or you haven't used substances, those are the things that kind of keep us isolated and away from people. And at the end of the day, I believe everybody needs community. And so I think that is fantastic what you have going on up there at the Phoenix. And what were you going to ask me, Lisa?
If you found any safe recovery spaces in Florida that you've connected with?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm venturing out to be a peer entrepreneur at the moment, but I used to work at an organization called the Lucia Recovery Alliance, and that's over in Daytona Beach, Florida. Well, correction, Ormond Beach, Florida. And it's just an organization where people can come if they identify with being in recovery more so, but it's open to anyone in the community who's curious about the recovery movement. And specifically, we have peer support there. There are, different programs we have a jail program. They have different support groups for people who are parents in recovery, grief support groups. They have a 12-step yoga group there. And so it's just for anyone in the community who wants to learn about recovery. And if you are in recovery and you're taking your next steps to advance your life, maybe find work or any barrier that you may have, you can go there for support. Another organization that I'd like to mention in our area is called Renew Recovery Cafe. And what I like specifically about Renew Recovery Cafe is this space doesn't necessarily focus on just one thing. They emphasize homelessness, mental health disorders, and people who are in recovery. And so I like that it's an open space, and they're all about relationships, that community that Grant was mentioning, where people can just come. It's safe. You can fellowship. They have coffee and conversations and games, and they do art projects together. And so those are the two different organizations we have in our community. And then I am starting something similar to kind of what Grant was mentioning. It's just much smaller. It's a recovery organizational support group for women. But as Grant was mentioning, I don't want to put that emphasis on if you work in a program, if you're doing meetings, or if you identify with being in recovery. It's open to all women who are interested in just living healthier lives. And so movement and finding different physical activities and ways that we can get healthy together, so that we feel better, and then we can improve our relationships and, live more meaningful lives, is the goal of that support group. So I think just having that open space, that not those people versus these people, those people who are in recovery and those people who are sober, none of that really matters. It's just about having that space, to connect.
And I don't have lived experience with addiction, but I
Right.
find that sober spaces are so much safer for me. Like, I feel so much more comfortable in that environment than I do just if I were to go to the gym and do rock climbing on my own, or,
Yeah.
there was just something like the community immediately wraps themselves around you, and you get that support. And I, thank you for creating such an amazing space, both of you, because, it pushes people outside their comfort zone just enough, and have the support system to catch them if they need it. So I think it's so valuable to have that. And up by me, I'm in super rural New Jersey. Yes, that exists. It's like forest and farms, and it's not Sopranos and Newark Airport everywhere. So there's not a whole lot up here. We have one center for prevention and counseling that does all the recovery stuff for our county. And they'll do a paint night or bingo night, or, but it's it's not fun. I don't know how to say that nicely, but
the recreational piece. Yeah.
Yeah. They do a lot of wonderful things. They really do. They're known within the county. They do so many programs. But it's not the same kind of all inclusive. I wouldn't feel comfortable going to events because it's very much programmy.
I like the word that you used. You said fun. And I don't know if you noticed, I use that word, interesting activities, because before I got sober, I thought that it was fun to not be able to recall the things that I did, and I would do it again and again and again, but to now be able to go into a place and socialize where people are we trying to have memorable, meaningful experiences. but in a way that keeps us engaged for our age,
Exactly.
because there are certain things, in my 30s, I'm not interested in. Sometimes I wouldn't say bingo would be the most interesting activity on a Saturday night. So I think having those innovative experiences that can resemble past experiences, but are in a much healthier space, right. With people who have similar mindsets, and we're on a similar path to live our lives in a manner of wellness, so to speak.
Yeah. I think it's fun. Yeah, you're right. Fun. Because that's kind of what we always kind of associated with the drinkings and, going out drinking, like, oh, it's fun,
Yeah.
So you still want to have that engagement and the connection and doing the fun activity just in a much healthier way. So yeah, that's a good observation. I like that. Grant, I have a question for you. So you had mentioned like you were kind of doing your step work and you were doing CrossFit and like they were very separate, but you would try to like bring them together. How do you find, like, do you find that like, your CrossFit work is bringing in, your step 11, or do you integrate them that closely, or do you just kind of, it's just part of your day to day?
No, I do. No, that was like very early recovery delusion when I assumed that once I stopped using every day, that like the entire world was ready to embrace this like new sober Grant, and almost like I think some egomaniacism, thinking like this whole thing and all these new spaces are all set up to like see me maximally succeed in my new life, my new amazing life, which everyone needs to know about. But yeah, no, I don't, I try to practice the principles of the program of the 12 steps, in all my affairs, as is encouraged.
Sure.
But no, I'm not, I don't think
it's not like an intentional, I did my step 10.
No, it's not like, no, it's not like this workout is themed on like, like this one's going to be really hard and introspective. It's going to be like a step 4 workout. Like, no, we're not, like, we don't do that,
Do you find like even within the Phoenix that like you are like talking step work, or is it really you're just there enjoying the time? Like, do you find that like recovery and the steps come into the conversation?
I don't think we have a lot of different, I'd say most of our members in New York are 12-step affiliated, but like most is not. It's not a huge majority. Yeah.
Got it.
And even within those 12 steps affiliations, they're probably split kind of down the middle. Okay. Maybe into thirds, some uneven thirds of different 12-step fellowships, right? Which already don't have a lot of interaction.
Right.
Like the CMA people and the AA people like don't. They might go to each other's meetings. Like CMA people go to AA meetings, but it's like not a huge amount of overlap. Okay. We do have a few events which are like very heavily populated by people who are like from the same home group and stuff like that. Okay. And they'll make like jokes and bring their recovery into it in some way, shape, or form. But no, that's not at all like what we intend to do. Okay. We're not, if somebody's like talking about their sponsor or like making jokes about the program or something in a Phoenix event, we're not like, don't do that.
Right.
We're like, come as you are.
Yeah.
But that's not what the space is like set up for.
Yeah, I didn't get the feel that it was, if you needed something, everyone was there for you, but it wasn't like, how long have you been sober? Like it wasn't the.
Yeah, we never ask people, like no Phoenix volunteer or Phoenix employee will like really ever ask people how much time they have. Sometimes in events we'll be like, does anyone have any recovery anniversaries or milestones they'd like to share? Sure. But I really, it's like for a lot of people who keep coming back to us, it really is that opportunity to have some sober space. And there are some people who in our chapter who are like really great, really active members who are still struggling.
Yeah.
you know, and they're members of different fellowships and are trying different things, but it seems to be the thing they always come back to first is the Phoenix, because it gives them this opportunity to just be among other sober people again without having to
go through hi, my name is.
Yeah, or like raise their hand and be like, I got 3 days, or like it's kind of this nice buffer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's a nice buffer for, you know, feelings of like shame or whatever it is that they're experiencing in relationship to re-engaging their recovery.
It's interesting. There's a woman who speaks at one of the retreats I went to, and she had recurrence of symptoms and started drinking again. And like, she didn't want to go to her home group. She didn't want to go because of the shame and the embarrassment that she had started drinking again. And her friends, like, luckily she had a great support system, and her husband or son or somebody had called people from her home group and said she needs a meeting, and they came and dragged her out of the house and brought her there, you know. So like, they didn't allow her shame to kind of keep her in her home and doing it alone. So, you know, it's a true thing, you know. It's kind of this like feeling of failure, but it's not, you know. We make mistakes, and so yeah, I like the buffer of kind of not having to proclaim anything.
Yeah, and I think there's also this great thing with the Phoenix where we set an expectation that this is a space for people that are sober, people that are in recovery, but it's also this different way of asking for help. It's this way of being like, I'm going to come here and rely on this service and this experience and get this like reprieve. It's not asking for help in the same way of like going to a meeting.
Yeah.
And I think the Phoenix sort of strikes a really good balance between, you know, like absence of proof or like sober bar type events and like going to a meeting.
Yeah.
Like at a Phoenix event, you're going to find like other people in recovery who are happy to be like, I'm in recovery. Like, let's talk about that. Welcome back. Do you want to get coffee after? You want to hang out? This sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then absence of proof is sort of like this. They're amazing events, don't get me wrong, but I don't know if it's the kind of space where you can walk in and somebody be like, you'll be like, oh, I have a phone Negroni. And somebody's like, how are you doing today? And you're like, actually really bad. And like, you can sort of talk about that and have that be like socially acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's this other end of the spectrum where if you walk into an AA meeting, somebody's like, how are you doing? You're like, I'm doing really bad. Then we might end up with like more attention than you necessarily wanted that day. Do you know what I mean? You might be put in a situation where you're facing more than you want to. And the other thing that's great about Phoenix events is that like a lot of people, like we do have a lot of people come in early recovery. And I know that when I first got sober, like I knew a lot more than I could say. Right. And I would go to AA meetings and it would be like, all these people seem like they're professional public speakers. Like I am so disconnected from my emotions. Like I theoretically want what you have, but like the thought of me getting there seems impossible.
Right.
So like, where do I fit in here? And within a Phoenix event, like you might show up and you might be like 4 days sober, but you might have been like a pro athlete and we're going to do a CrossFit workout. And you might like crush the guy with 31 years in the workout. And all of a sudden, like kind of this like hierarchy starts to shift a little bit. And you can maybe feel a little bit like, oh, like I can do this.
I got this,
I have
right.
skills or, you know, whatever. And not that that would happen for everybody, but there's this thing where, you know, I don't think that AA is inherently hierarchical other than the fact that I think that like society is.
Right.
You know, and like that's how we organize as people from, you know, from tribalism all the way up to like, you know, celebrity and the government and all these things. Like we tend to want to have people that we like look up to and model sort of our behavior after. And I think in the Phoenix, like that's a little bit more flexible and a little bit more malleable and a little bit less seemingly unattainable than it was, at least just sharing from my experience, just what it was like coming into a room for the first time.
It sounds very welcoming from what I'm hearing you say. I know, you know, from my personal experience going to these meetings, like you said, you feel like you have to be this professional at understanding the context of everything that's going on and and something's being spoken in the meeting and you didn't respond in the right way. And you're like, okay, am I really coming back to this? Because there seems like too much for me to know, and I'm barely able to get in the door, you know? But you guys kind of remove that barrier to where the moment that you step in the space, you don't have to feel that imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know if this is quite the space for me because I don't, you know, measure up in these ways. I personally felt that time and time and time again. So I really love that you guys offer that environment. And I thought it was pretty cool how you said that, you know, someone who hasn't had that much time sober and you've got someone who's got many years in, and then they go, you know, at CrossFit or something, and you know the person is outdoing them, and it's like, oh, okay, you know. It reminds me of my military days when, you know, you'll have a 40-year-old private who just got in the military, you know, and then you'll have that higher ranking officer, and they're like lower 20s, and at the end of the day, it's like, we're here for the same reason, and that's the only thing that matters, you know, like for the same values, you know. And it's the same thing with, sounds like with the Phoenix, you know, you're showing up, you're trying to have a good time, you know, you're trying to be around the right people, and that's what matters. When too much emphasis gets on you know, the structure of whatever meeting you're in, you know, I've seen people say, you know, like, I don't want to go, you know, I don't want to get help, you know, because they don't feel comfortable. You know, they don't feel comfortable, but those meetings are great. I'm all about 12 steps in recovery. But sometimes it just takes that step to connect and have the community and just, you know, making the healthier choices to first even get to the point where you're like, you know what, okay, now I'm ready to progress to be held accountable in these ways, you know, sponsorship, you know, like sometimes we just need community, you know. So I
think that's it. I mean, community, and that's the thing I've noticed from going to retreats. Like, you know, we can all read the big book, we can all teach ourselves the steps, you know, but at the end of the day, it's the people that you start to connect with that really make the biggest impact, you know. And when I started with Came to Believe, you know, I went to that retreat and it was virtual at the time because COVID, and still there managed to be this amazing community of supportive people, and just they lifted each other up in this time of isolation and really formed an amazing online community. And then that got to go, you know, back out in real life, and you know, you start to meet these people that you've known for years, and now you're seeing them in person. It just builds that community even stronger. So it's, I think, you know, that seems to be the thread, right? Is that community that brings people together, that people are really searching for. Because I think we're kind of all in this isolation with Zoom meetings and cell phones, and we're all craving community. We need that as humans. We need to feel connected. So
absolutely.
I like to think too that with the Phoenix, sometimes we have the opportunity to like provide people earlier in recovery or returning to recovery sort of with that sense of community through these different experiences, which also allows them to then be a little bit more proactive and solution focused through whatever other recovery path that they're approaching. They can sort of like offload some of the new friends, you know, like new lifestyle stuff on what we do. Ways to fill their evenings and fill their time, and then they can really start to look at you know, their program as their program. And that's the other thing that's amazing about more sober spaces, right? Is it allows things to be more sort of what they are,
right?
You know, it's like Absence of Proof is amazing. It's like we are a sober bar where it's like all the same except with a little bit less shenanigans and no alcohol. Right? Probably a lot less shenanigans.
Probably a lot less,
you know, and then there's the Phoenix, and it's like, what do? We set an intention that we're here for people in recovery, and then we're just going to do this other activity.
Right.
And you're going to be around people that'll like have whatever sort of conversation you want to have.
Yeah.
But like, it's not structured. It's not like we start with this thing, we go to this thing, we go to this thing, we take some money, put it in a basket, then we do this thing, and then like we say goodbye.
Right.
You know, it's like very much like, oh, what are we here for? Let's get to know each other. We do a question of the day. What's your favorite cereal? Oh, that's amazing. I also love that cereal. Let's do the activity. Do the activity, get embodied, get to identify as however you identify while doing an activity that you may regularly do or not normally do. Gain some more fortification in your identity.
Yeah.
You know, and then like you go to a 12-step meeting and it's like, oh, what do we do? It's like, we do these steps. You know. You know, and not like this is a place where, like, yes, this is a room full of people who are like
Right.
trying to abstain from using drugs or alcohol,
Right.
and are succeeding in all different various levels of success. No, it's like, oh no, this is a meeting where like we discuss and strengthen our interpersonal relationships in a way to further support one another to do these steps.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
like the more that there's these other sober spaces, the ones that are like good at what they do can like more sort of like specialize, not in an intentional way, but just in a like, the people showing up are going to be like, oh, this is a place where you do the steps.
Right. It's more focused as opposed to like, I need to meet some sober friends, so let me go to, you know, the
Yeah,
AA
exactly.
meeting.
Yeah, now there's more spaces to do all of that other stuff.
Right. Yeah, that
And
makes
that's
sense.
something that's really great
Yeah.
for me, in that like, well, one, the greatest thing about the steps for me is that you know, they don't align themselves with having outside entities, so that like the one place where I'm not like hawking what the Phoenix does is within a meeting.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like
Right.
it's not allowed.
Right.
Which is a beautiful rule. But the thing that's great about it is it's like I walk into a meeting and I'm like, oh, this is when I do this kind of
Right.
work.
Yep.
And this kind of work is not that other work that I do.
Yeah.
That
It
other
allows you to
work
focus.
can be really amorphous, right? It can be like a pottery class, it can be a yoga class, it can be whatever. But if somebody's like, we're gonna, you know, it's the first 64 pages, we're not doing these other things, except for like your yoga 12-step class, which I don't really know how that goes, but that sounds amazing. But and that I think is one of the great things about sober spaces.
Yeah.
Is that like we can have these non-alcoholic bars, which like AA doesn't have to have an opinion at. We can have these other climbing events. They don't need to have opinion about them, etc.
Right.
And it allows these spaces that do something really, really well to do those spaces even better, because there are other options for other people.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It allows you to focus on what you're there to focus on. And yeah, that's it. So we only have a couple of minutes left, but one of the things I did want to talk about was kind of this sober curious movement. And Grant, how long have you been with the Phoenix?
I've been with the Phoenix since I started as a volunteer just about 20 months ago, I guess. So like February of last year.
Have you, like, I've noticed just from, you know, social media and things like that, like this shift in this acceptance of sobriety and this sober movement, whether or not they had an addictive background or whatever, but for health and, you know, both physical and mental health, people are choosing to stop using alcohol. And I'm wondering if you've seen like an influx, although they don't identify, but if people have identified as not necessarily being in recovery, but just looking to have a safe place where they don't feel pressured to drink.
Yeah, we have a number of members and volunteers that have come through us sort of like through that wavelength. I'm not sure that I've had any come to us through like some sort of like influencer seduction to be like, I should be sober curious or something like that. But actually people who've been like, I realized I don't like drinking.
Yeah.
And like, I wanted to hang out with people still, and like, didn't know what that looked like. And like, thanks for providing a space for that.
Yeah.
I can say also that some of our members who've come to us as just being people who don't use, like not having any identity, just being like, I don't drink alcohol.
Yeah.
Some of them have actually like really engaged with recovery stuff after a while.
Yeah.
You know, for some people, it's a lot easier to put down than it was for me.
Right.
And just because it's easier to put down doesn't mean that like the isms aren't as prevalent.
Right.
Right? Just because it was like, oh, I was able to stop that doesn't mean that like that
You
way
still
of
weren't
thinking
reliant on
is
it for-
eradicated,
Mhm.
and that I am, functioning to my fullest capacity as it comes to my interpersonal relationships or my relationship with myself or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's been interesting, is to see some people start to be around a lot of people that are in recovery and then be like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, I'll go check that out.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of an advanced level of open-mindedness, looking at where the playing field is right now. I mean, one of the things the Phoenix wants to do, like, abundantly is, like, first and foremost, and I think Came to Believe as well, is like fighting stigma around, right? Like, Came to Believe is like, just come to the retreat. Like, that's my favorite thing about Came to Believe, is it's like, if you don't know if the 12 steps are for you, just like take this weekend.
Yeah.
And like, if it's the worst thing, like, thank God you didn't spend all that time in those meetings.
Right.
You know what
You
I
spend
mean?
3 days.
Like,
Like, all right.
you figured it out, And also, like, if you want to be in the 12 steps and you're like insecure about like not knowing the preamble or whatever, or like, you're not going to learn the preamble at Came to Believe, but like, you don't understand like what the process is.
Right.
It's a great way to sort of like earn your seat for
yeah,
yourself.
exactly.
Like,
It
not that you
kind
need
of
to earn
like
your seat.
jumpstarts you into understanding.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I get this.
Right.
And like, I get what this meeting's for.
Right.
Which is really cool. But yeah, as far as like sober curious, I mean, yeah, like the non-alcoholic beverage industry is booming. People are like choosing not to drink all of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's great.
It's awesome. Like, I love it personally. Like,
I don't know how much it has to do like with me though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm a person in recovery, and there's like a reason I don't drink.
Right.
And like, there's a reason that I do the things I do to like support other people on that journey.
Sure.
Like, I don't care if people like drink or don't drink or use drugs. Like, I just don't want people to feel small.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
if like drinking non-alcoholic wine is like helping you not feel small, amazing.
Great.
Like, and I don't mean that with any
it.
shade or any like dismissiveness. It's just like, just like cool. Like, that
like, it normalizes not drinking a little bit more to help kind of take the stigma off, like.
Yeah, I'm not sure if like normalizing not drinking by there being a lot of non-alcoholic drinks in the world reduces the stigma. I'm not 100% sure of that.
Yeah.
It reduces the stigma around not having alcohol in your system.
Sure.
It doesn't reduce the stigma around being like, I am somebody with like, that's had mental health crises and like was a heroin addict.
Well, there's
and
stigma.
Does Athletic Brewing Company make space for that? I'm not 100% sure.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think it's doing the wrong thing, but I think there's a capacity for us as people within this space to like sort of misattribute what acceptance looks like.
Sure. No,
just
I get
my mom's like, oh, I'll have a non-alcoholic gin and tonic. Does that mean that like I feel safer in that? Maybe in early recovery it would, because it would be like, oh, like there's places I can go that don't have alcohol where I'm not going to drink them.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say.
I mean, so years ago, I thought I had an allergy to alcohol. So like in my early 20s, I stopped drinking because I would get violently ill, and I didn't drink for probably 15, 16 years, which is supposed to be the prime drinking age. And like, people were convinced I was pregnant for like 10 years because I was never drinking, So it was like, why aren't you drinking? I don't want to.
Right.
Why not?
Yeah.
And like, so just, there was a stigma with just not wanting to drink, even without having the addictive personality. Like, it was still an issue with people. Like,
you're no fun.
I'm no fun, right? I must be pregnant. Like, no, I'm not pregnant. So I think there's like different levels of that stigma of not drinking. There's like at, just the social level, but then obviously at the greater level, when you are struggling with the mental health and the addictive traits of that, there's even more. So I think it's like slicing off rung by rung a little bit of that stigma. So hopefully where people do feel safe to admit that they have an addiction and need help, but how can you ask for help when they stigmatize you for not even drinking when you don't have help? So, I feel like that absence.
Yeah, no, I think that there's something there for sure.
Yeah.
And they're making the connection more and more with mental health and addiction. And so I feel like the more we normalize those conversations, the more normalized it's going to become to why we're choosing not to drink, why we're choosing the mocktails, So we just need to keep having the conversations.
Yeah. And I love that mental health is now becoming more socially acceptable to talk about, and saying, I'm going to my therapist tonight is not as taboo as it was probably even 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Even. I think everybody got a therapist during COVID because we were all,
we all need someone to talk to. Yeah.
Right.
Not everyone has this. Not everyone has Recovery Live.
Right. Exactly. We need to go somewhere to talk. But
that's why we need the sober spaces, guys.
Yeah. Well, listen, we hit time. We could probably go for another half hour. It was fun. So I'd love to have you guys back on and see where else the conversation will lead us. But I'm looking forward to talking to you again. And thank you for being on.
Thanks for having us.
Lisa.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Grant.
So that's it for this week. We'll be back. I think Tom is back next week. And we'll see. I don't know what the topic is, but we will see you next week. Thanks for joining.